in the late 1800s, the Neo-Malthusian Society was very popular among many of the wealthiest people in Britain. And they thought that all these problems of unemployment and labor strikes and uprisings, they said, well, this isn't the problem of capitalism. This is just there's too many people. And the phrase useless eaters was widely promoted. And the idea was that there are too many people in the world. There's overpopulation. I know Margaret Sanger, who was a feminist and a socialist activist, she, after the Russian Revolution, she saw that the Soviet Union was not the free sex, free love paradise she was hoping for. And so she became a Malthusian. And during the Great Depression, she went around saying that the Great Depression was caused by overpopulation. And she spoke at Ku Klux Klan meetings. She argued that birth control and abortion could be used to eliminate certain races and certain ethnic groups, and that she went from being a socialist to being, a far-right racist and such because she bought into this idea that we need to reduce the population. There are too many people in the world, and that is how many of the richest people in the world feel. And I don't think that's hard to discover, and it's not conspiratorial. The idea that they're all sitting up there in a smoke-filled room plotting to kill the whole human race, I don't buy, right? That would obviously be crazy. But the idea that many of them believe that the problem facing the world is there are too many people and that there's too much growth, that is being widely promoted. That is almost the party line in the United States. And it's wrong. It's not true, right? The human race, human beings are the source of all wealth. We're not useless eaters. Human beings are the creators of all the value that exists in the world. With human beings, we can advance. And people talk about limited resources. This is a very common thing I hear from people. Well, it's true that there are limited resources in the world. And, if we were still burning wood to heat our homes, we would have deforested the planet centuries ago. But we don't. We started burning coal, and now we burn natural gas. We have electrical heat. And that the whole history of the human race is our reinvention of our relationship with nature, right? When one fuel source, one energy source, one mode of production becomes outmoded, we reach a higher plane. And that's why China is putting so much money and funding into fusion energy research right now, because fossil fuels has its limitations. And fossil fuels could very well be contributing to global warming. I'm not a scientist.
I think it's definitely contributing to pollution. I mean, where we grew up, I grew up in Ohio and Indiana also, in one place where I was born actually is not that far from Orville, by the way. Where Ashland, Ohio is where I was born. Okay. But we live mostly in northwest Ohio and central Indiana, but we lived in Oklahoma. Preacher's kids, we move around a lot. But I remember seeing in a lot of small towns and rural areas, a lot of creeks and rivers and streams that were, when I was a kid, very polluted. And I knew that sometimes there'd be railroads nearby, and you never knew what chemicals might have been going into the waterways. So I remember thinking, like, man, this probably used to be really pristine not that long ago. So there definitely is pollution. So people who want to try to excuse climate change and use that as a reason to, well, there's not really that much pollution. Capitalism or modern industrial society didn't create that. Like, come on. It certainly did. I mean, that's why it is. That's why it doesn't look pristine anymore. And you go to other parts of the world where that didn't happen, and it's pristine because that it is modern civilization and basically caused by capitalism.
Yeah, and that we're not poo-pooing any environmental concern, right? And we want to interact with our environment and use our resources in a sustainable and logical way, not just based on whatever's profitable in the short term. But I think that the problem is that the majority of voices that have dominance in the environmental movement take the attitude that human beings themselves are the problem. And that is a very toxic worldview, right? And that is a pessimistic worldview. And that is really what we're up against. And I would argue that really what it is that it's the big monopolies, the imperialists. They are at the top of the world, right? The big bankers of London and New York City, Wall Street, and the Western countries, they are at the top of the world. And the world is continuing to grow beyond their grip. And there's this whole new economy coming out of Russia and China and Bolivarianism in South America and some of these African countries that have asserted their independence. There's a whole new economy in the world. And so the Western elite are now saying, well, game over. The game must end now, so we stay at the top indefinitely. And that's not how humanity works. I mean, human beings are constantly moving toward a higher plane. And, maybe we need to do so more efficiently. I think fusion energy is a great alternative to fossil fuels. And I'm very excited about China's research in that direction. Their recent space shuttle, space probe that went to the far side of the moon to collect helium-3. I mean, I'm all about moving beyond fossil fuels. But the point is to move higher. And the idea that we can somehow degrow the human race, it's not only is it fruitless, because that's just not how human beings work, right? But it's also very dangerous. And I would argue that was the basis of Nazism. And the Nazis, they tried to exterminate different races, and they created a slave labor underclass. And, that was the basis for a lot of the genocidal crimes, the famines that were imposed by the British Empire and the various territories that they colonized. And that degrowth is very, very dangerous. It is psychologically damaging, young people now. There's such depression and all of that. Well, maybe it's because the TV and the schools are telling them that they are a cancer on the planet, that they are no good, right? And that's being promoted. I mean, would you feel good about yourself if you'd been told that your whole life? Obviously not, So we need to push back against this degrowth ideology. But I don't think that negates environmentalism.
Yeah, I agree. And we might as well shift to economics now. So and I think it was Professor Richard Wolff that really got me more interested in economics than I had been. And because he had a different perspective on it, right? He's known as a Marxist economist. And that's... He uses maybe different terminology in some ways than you do, but he's really saying the same thing. That, I think, I try to sometimes put it in a spiritual context even. Like, I think, why would we not think when the universe is everything, why would there not be abundance for everyone? Mm-hmm. That would just be common sense. It would only be the limited thinking of so-called human beings that would say it's otherwise. And what it looks like to me in the system, the way it is at end stage capitalism, as I think it is that there's this assumption that, well, if you keep the top 30% comfortable or rich, that that keeps capitalism in control. But with the data that came, it was just even released in 2022 from the U.S. Congressional Budget Office. And this, I shared this in a meeting on Monday night. That the top 1% we heard about during Occupy Wall Street, they as of 2019, they share about 40% of the wealth, which is very similar to what it was when I looked at data during Occupy Wall Street. About 1/3 of all the wealth, right? Mm-hmm. The top 1%. And that's about 3.5 million people. Right, so that hasn't really changed all that much. And of course, you can go higher. We 0.01%, like David DeGrowth said. That's really what it's about when you talk about the extreme greed. Mm-hmm. But the other two statistics that I thought were really interesting, like the bottom 50%, between 1989 and 2019, shared 2% of the wealth. It pretty much has not changed, and that's up to the pandemic. And perhaps the most shocking one of all is that the top 10%, as of 2019, shares about 72% of the wealth in this country. So why is this inequality just out of control? And it just gets worse when Oxfam introduces their statistics at the beginning of the year, every year. It just gets worse and worse. You even have fewer, billionaires with more money. You know what I mean? With each year. And we're talking gross amounts of the world's wealth in the hands of maybe a dozen people. It's insane. There's no other word I can use to describe it. So this is not a system that is sustainable.